Imagine this. It's early November and you're walking through your local Target or Walmart. The shelves are starting to fill with Christmas decorations. Plastic trees, colorful lights, boxes of ornaments. Maybe you reach for a pack of party poppers or a festive sweater for an upcoming office party. But this year, you notice something's off. The prices feel steeper. The shelves, a little emptier than usual. Now zoom out from that quiet shopping aisle to the global stage. On one side, the United States, slapping tariffs as high as 145% on Chinese goods. On the other, Beijing, responding with its own hike, from 84% up to 125%. A tit for tat that's not just about numbers or headlines. It's about your wallet, your holiday plans, and the silent tug-of-war happening behind every barcode. This isn't just a trade war between two economic superpowers. It's a price war at your local checkout counter. And the escalation? It's been rapid. Just a few weeks ago, we were already deep in tariff territory. Then seemingly overnight, both nations cranked things up. From 84% to 125% to 145%. No time for adjustment, no time for breathing room. Picture a simple animated chart. One side climbs, then the other responds. A back and forth spike that looks more like a heartbeat in distress than a stable economic policy. This is the tariff spiral, and it's pulling businesses, farmers, families, and consumers deeper into the chaos. But what does that mean in real life? Not in percentages or politics, but in the things you buy every week. A toy that used to cost $10 might now be $14. A pair of shoes, $80 becomes $100. And it's not because they're better made. It's because tariffs have become part of the price tag. So how did we get here? Why are these numbers climbing like a roller coaster no one asked to ride? And most importantly, who's really paying for all this? Let's take a closer look. Have you ever looked at your grocery bill and thought, wait, wasn't this cheaper last year? You're not imagining things. While the headlines often say that tariffs are meant to punish China, the truth is the impact hits much closer to home. Right at the American checkout counter. Tariffs don't just disappear into the air. They get baked into the prices of everyday items. Let's say you're buying a pack of light bulbs or some kitchen gadgets, maybe even toys for your kids. A lot of those products, or their parts, are made in China. When tariffs go up, so does the cost for companies importing those goods. And you guessed it, they pass that cost on to you. It's like a hidden tax that shows up not on your paycheck, but on your receipts. And here's the thing. We often hear political leaders say, China's paying the price. But the reality, American families are footing much of the bill. One study from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York estimated that tariffs cost the average U.S. household around $800 a year. That's not pocket change. That's a month of groceries or a few utility bills. And it's not just consumers, it's farmers too. Soybean and pork producers, especially across the Midwest, have seen one of their biggest export markets. China shrivel almost overnight. When Beijing retaliated with its own tariffs, American farm goods became way too expensive for Chinese buyers. I remember speaking to a small family farmer in Iowa last year. He told me, we've been working this land for 3 generations. Now we're storing soybeans in silos, just waiting, hoping prices will bounce back. There was a heaviness in his voice, not just from the financial loss, but from the uncertainty. And that's something we don't always hear in news reports. The emotional toll this trade war is having. For every politician drawing up tariff strategies in Washington, there's a parent in Ohio stretching their budget, a farmer in Kansas wondering if next season is even worth planting. I know some folks believe this is the price of economic toughness, of standing up to unfair trade. And yes, it's important to protect national interests, but we also need to be honest about who's absorbing the shock in the meantime. It's not just factories in Guangdong or officials in Beijing, it's everyday Americans. So while the narrative might sound like we're winning, the reality is far more complicated and personal, which brings us to an important question. If reshoring production and raising tariffs isn't easing the burden, is there really a better alternative? Let's talk about the illusion of making everything made in America and why it's not as simple as it sounds. What if we just made everything here in America again? No more relying on China for toys, electronics, or holiday decorations. Just good old made in the USA. It sounds like a perfect solution, right? But here's the twist. It's not that simple. While the idea of reshoring, bringing manufacturing back home, feels empowering, the reality is far more complicated and more expensive. Let's take something as simple as a t-shirt. The reason it costs $8 at your favorite store is because it was likely made in a country where labor is cheap, materials are sourced in bulk, and factories run at massive scale. If that same t-shirt were made in the US, you'd be looking at $25, maybe even $30. Not because we can't do it, but because wages are higher, regulations are stricter, and production lines aren't optimized for high-volume, low-margin goods like they are overseas. It's not about lacking the skill or the will, it's about economics. And here's the kicker. Most Americans say they love the idea of buying American-made products until they see the price tag. I've been there too. Standing in a store comparing the two nearly identical items and choosing the cheaper one because the budget just won't stretch any further that week. So the dream of reshoring everything, it starts to fade once we realize we're not just asking companies to change, we're asking consumers to change too. Now, this isn't the first time America has faced this kind of dilemma. Back in the 1980s, there was a similar outcry when Japan was dominating the auto and electronics markets. Tensions rose, tariffs were slapped on, and Buy American became a rallying cry. But guess what? Even then, reshoring had limits. Many companies didn't bring production back. They just shifted it to other low-cost countries. Fast forward to today, and the same pattern is emerging. Only now the supply chains are even more global, more interdependent, and more fragile. And let's be honest, sometimes Made in USA gets used more as a political slogan than a practical policy. It plays well in campaign speeches, but in real life, manufacturing ecosystems take years to rebuild, if not decades. That's not to say we shouldn't strengthen domestic industries. We absolutely should, especially in sectors critical to national security or innovation, like semiconductors or renewable energy. But mass-producing sneakers and dollar store toys? That's not the future America's built for. So if reshoring isn't the silver bullet, what is? Maybe the answer lies in focusing on where our strengths really are and understanding where China is feeling the heat. Let's look at what's really going on inside the world's second largest economy and why appearances can be deceiving. From the outside, China can feel unshakable. Skyscrapers rising by the day, bullet trains gliding across the country, and tech giants expanding into markets all over the world. But behind that sleek exterior, there's a storm brewing, one that most people outside of China rarely see. It's a reminder that even the world's second largest economy has its cracks. One of the biggest? The property market. For years, real estate was the engine of China's domestic growth. Developers built entire cities, sometimes faster than people could move into them. It created jobs, boosted local GDP, and gave the illusion of unstoppable momentum. But then, the debt caught up. Companies like Evergrande, once worth billions, collapsed under the weight of unpaid loans. Apartment buildings sat half-finished. Buyers who had paid deposits were left with nothing but empty frames and broken promises. And this isn't a fringe issue. Real estate accounts for roughly 20 to 25% of China's GDP when you include construction, home furnishings, and related services. When that sector starts to wobble, the whole economy feels it. Then there's the export slowdown. With tariffs rising and Western demand cooling, China's once reliable trade engine is sputtering. Factories that used to hum day and night are now cutting shifts or closing altogether. Even in cities like Yiwu, once the heartbeat of small consumer exports, traders are saying U.S. orders have dried up. And here's where things get really complicated for President Xi Jinping. On one hand, he's under real economic pressure. From the debt crisis, from job losses, from the need to stimulate growth without triggering inflation. But on the other hand, he can't afford to look weak. Not to his political rivals, not to his people, and especially not to Washington. In Chinese political culture, losing face isn't just embarrassing. It's destabilizing. That's why we're seeing such a firm stance, even in the face of mounting internal strain. Now, personally, I find this part of the story both fascinating and sobering. It shows how deeply pride and perception are woven into global economic decisions, not just numbers on spreadsheets. And it reminds us that while both nations are playing hardball, they're doing so under very different kinds of pressure. For the US, it's about economic leverage and political messaging. For China, it's about national image, internal stability, and long-term control. But the result? A dangerous game of economic chicken, where neither side wants to blink first. So where does that leave the rest of the world? To find out, we need to follow the ripple effects, starting with the global supply chain and what happens when it begins to break down. Have you ever ordered something online, maybe a phone case or a pair of sneakers, and suddenly the shipping date changes? Again, it's delayed. Again. You check the tracking info and the package hasn't even left the port. That tiny frustration you feel? Now imagine it multiplied by millions of products across thousands of businesses all around the world. That's what a supply chain breakdown looks like. And it's not just an inconvenience. It's a warning light blinking red across the global economy. Big names like Apple, Tesla, and Nike, they are right in the middle of it. These companies rely heavily on Chinese manufacturing, not just because it's cheaper, but because the infrastructure is already there. The suppliers, the logistics, the trained workforce. It's all part of a system that's been fine-tuned over decades. When tariffs hit and tensions rise, that whole system starts to shake. Factories face uncertainty. Shipping routes are disrupted. Sometimes entire shipments are rerouted mid-ocean or canceled before they ever reach the docks. And it's not just physical products. Think of semiconductors. Chips that power everything from your laptop to your car. A single missing component can stall an entire production line. Remember during the pandemic when people waited 6 months for new cars or video game consoles? A lot of that had to do with supply chain fragility. Now add a trade war on top of that. This puts even more pressure on companies that operate on a just-in-time model, where inventory is kept lean to save costs and products arrive exactly when needed. That model works beautifully when the system flows, but when it doesn't, everything backs up. I recently read a story about a US toy importer who had to cancel 40% of their Christmas orders because the freight costs skyrocketed and customs processing became unpredictable. Can you imagine being a small business, banking on the holiday season, only to watch your biggest sales window disappear? It's not just frustrating, it's existential. And here's the thing, even companies trying to shift production to countries like Vietnam, India, or Mexico are hitting roadblocks. Those places don't yet have the same scale or supply networks China does. So moving away from China is not a flip-the-switch decision. It's a long, messy, expensive process. And for now, most companies are still stuck navigating between two superpowers. I think that's the part people don't always see. This isn't just about factories or shipping containers. It's about resilience and about how fragile our global systems really are when politics get in the way of production. But if volatility is the new normal, what happens when leadership is just as unpredictable? Let's take a look at how policy and even a single tweet can send the entire market into a tailspin. One tweet, that's all it takes to rattle the markets, shift billions in global trade, and send economists scrambling to rewrite tomorrow's forecast. And during the peak of the US-China trade war, we saw it happen again and again. You'd wake up, check the news, and suddenly, new tariffs announced, or tariffs delayed, or maybe reversed, then reimposed a few days later. It became nearly impossible for businesses, investors, and even government agencies to plan more than a few weeks ahead. Now, to be fair, using unpredictability as a negotiation tactic isn't new, but under the Trump administration, that unpredictability went into overdrive. Trade policy, something that usually takes months of research, debate, and strategy, was sometimes broadcast in 280 characters or less, and markets responded in real time. I remember one morning in particular, Trump tweeted about increasing tariffs on $300 billion of Chinese goods. Within minutes, stock markets began tumbling. By the end of the day, the Dow had dropped over 600 points. Investors hate surprises, especially ones that can change the direction of entire industries. That kind of volatility doesn't just hurt portfolios, it shakes confidence. And when the US dollar started slipping against other currencies, it wasn't just about trade, it was about trust. A weaker dollar means Americans pay more for imports. But more importantly, it signals to the world that the US might not be the stable economic anchor it once was. I've had conversations with small business owners who told me they couldn't sign supplier contracts because they didn't know what tariffs would be next week. Or investors who paused major projects because the playing field kept shifting under their feet. This kind of uncertainty creates a chilling effect. It makes long-term planning almost impossible. And that hurts innovation, job creation, and economic growth at home. Now, I'm not saying tough trade policy is wrong. Every country has the right to protect its interests. But strategy needs consistency. You can't play chess if the rules keep changing every move. Personally, I think one of the biggest challenges we face isn't just economic. It's psychological. When people stop trusting the system, they stop investing in it. And once confidence is lost, it's really hard to get it back. So what's the way forward? Is there a path where both sides can step back, rethink the battle lines, and find some kind of common ground? Let's wrap this up by exploring what history can teach us, and whether there's still a chance to rewrite the ending to this trade war story. What if the real victory isn't in winning the trade war, but in learning how to end it? Because let's be honest, no one walks away from a trade war untouched. Not consumers, not businesses, not governments. And as this economic standoff between the US and China stretches on, a growing number of voices, especially from Europe, are urging both sides to sit down, talk, and find a way out. The reason? Europe has a lot to lose if this continues. Many European economies rely heavily on trade with both the US and China. When those two giants clash, ripple effects travel across the Atlantic fast. Factories slow down. Exports shrink. Confidence wavers. That's why countries like Germany have been especially vocal in pushing for negotiation, not escalation. They understand that stability isn't just good for diplomacy, it's essential for business. But here's the thing, this isn't the first time we've been here. Back in the 1980s, the US had a similar trade battle. This time with Japan. At the time, Japanese car makers were dominating the American market, and tensions ran high. Tariffs were threatened. Protests broke out. There were even symbolic acts like smashing Japanese cars in public demonstrations. It all felt intense and zero-sum, but eventually both countries found a way to compromise. Japan agreed to limit some exports voluntarily. The US invested in its own auto industry, and over time, things stabilized. Was it perfect? No, but it was progress. And that's a lesson we can take with us today. Because a trade war isn't just about goods, it's about people. It's about the small business in Texas trying to keep prices low, the farmer in Iowa searching for a market, the factory worker in China wondering if their shift will be cut. And the truth is, there are no easy answers. But I believe dialogue.real honest dialogue is the only path forward. It might not be fast, it might not make headlines like a dramatic tariff hike, but it builds something trade wars never can: trust. So can anyone truly win a trade war? In my view, no. Because if one side is bleeding and the other is limping, that's not victory. That's mutual damage. But if both sides can walk away with a little more understanding, a little more stability, and a little less fear, maybe that's the kind of win we should be aiming for. So let's take a moment to step back and reflect on what we've just explored together. We looked at how a spike in tariffs, meant to flex economic muscle, ends up hitting American shoppers, farmers, and small businesses the hardest. We peeled back the layers of the Made in America dream and saw why bringing production home isn't always practical, or even possible. We uncovered the cracks behind China's impressive economic exterior and how internal pressures are shaping their response to this global standoff. We examine the real-life impact of supply chain breakdowns, where even a delayed shipment can mean lost seasons and lost livelihoods. And we talked about unpredictability, how trade policy, when driven by tweets instead of long-term strategy, can shake markets and investor confidence in ways that hurt us all. Finally, we asked the big question, is there a way out? And maybe there is. If we're willing to learn from history, engage in honest dialogue, and shift our focus from winning to building something more sustainable. So what can we take away from this? Whether you're a consumer trying to stretch your budget, a business owner figuring out where to source materials, or simply someone trying to make sense of this fast-changing world, we all have a stake in the conversation. Ask questions, stay informed, and don't underestimate the power of public pressure when it comes to shaping policy. If this video gave you a new perspective, challenged your assumptions, or helped you connect some dots, don't let the conversation stop here. Like the video if you found it valuable. Subscribe if you want more content that cuts through the noise and digs deeper. And most importantly, share your thoughts in the comments. What part of the trade war affects you most? What do you think the US should do next? I read every comment, and your voice matters. Thanks again for watching. And until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep questioning the story behind the headlines.